This was supposed to be impossible. A crash that every single driver predicted, weeks in advance, and the FIA still let it happen. At over 300 kilometers per hour, with a speed difference no human can react to, Oliver Bearman hit the wall with a force most drivers never survive. 50 G. That's not just a number. That's the edge of what the human body can take. And here's the part that should worry you. This wasn't driver error. This wasn't bad luck. This was built into the rules. A system so flawed, it turns cars into unpredictable projectiles on the straights. Drivers warned them. Engineers explained it. Even the winners admitted it was dangerous. Nothing changed. Until now. Because just days before Miami, the FIA is rushing emergency rule changes behind the scenes. But what they're not telling you is whether those changes will actually prevent the next crash, or if we're about to see something even worse. Subscribe now, because the detail everyone missed is the one that explains why this is far from over. Everyone thinks the danger started with the crash. It didn't. It started weeks earlier, in a place no one paid enough attention to. Melbourne. The opening race. On the surface, everything looked normal. New season. New cars. New regulations. But underneath, something felt off. Drivers weren't talking about lap time. They weren't talking about tire wear. They were talking about something much harder to control. Speed difference. Not small differences. Not the kind you manage with skill. Extreme differences. Carlos Sainz was the first to say it clearly. He didn't hesitate. He said the gap between cars on the straight could suddenly become massive. And when that happens, you're no longer racing. You're surviving. That distinction matters more than anything. Because Formula One is built on precision. Every move calculated. Every overtake measured. But this introduced randomness. And randomness at 300 kilometers per hour is not competition. It's risk. And here's where most people miss the real issue. This wasn't about one car being faster than another. That's normal. This was about one car suddenly becoming much slower, without warning. That's completely different. Esteban Ocon described it in a way that should have set off alarms immediately. He said you could be on a fast lap, everything under control, and then suddenly, you look in your mirror, and a car is arriving far faster than expected. Not slightly faster. Violently faster. And in that moment, you don't know what to do. Move aside? Hold your line? You don't have time to decide. And that's the key detail. No time. At those speeds, your brain is already behind reality. By the time you react, the situation has already changed again. Now add another layer. Max Verstappen pushed it even further. He explained what happens when the car in front suddenly loses speed. Not gradually. Instantly. 40, even 50 kilometers per hour gone in seconds. And you're still flat out behind. Closing in. No warning. No signal. No chance. And this is where things become impossible to ignore. Because when multiple world-class drivers, from different teams, with different cars, all describe the same danger, using almost identical words, that's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns in Formula One always lead somewhere. But at this point, nothing changed. No emergency update. No immediate fix. Just discussions behind closed doors. And that silence, that delay, is exactly what allowed the next part of this story to happen. Because what came after Melbourne didn't reduce the risk, it amplified it. And what happened next made the situation impossible to ignore. After Melbourne, something shifted. The conversation stopped being quiet and started becoming uncomfortable. Because now, it wasn't just concern. It was contradiction. China exposed it. This is where the system revealed its most dangerous trait. The same rule that creates overtakes is the same rule that creates accidents. And that is a problem Formula One has never had to deal with like this before. Lando Norris said it without hiding. He admitted that some of his overtakes only happened because the car ahead suddenly lost speed. Think about that for a second. An overtake, not created by skill, but by a system forcing the other driver into vulnerability. And here's where it gets worse. Because if that system helps you in one moment, it exposes you in the next. No one is safe. Not the leaders. Not the midfield. Not even the winners. Everyone becomes a target at some point. And that changes the psychology completely. Drivers are no longer just pushing forward. They're constantly thinking, when will it happen to me? When will my car suddenly lose speed? When will someone appear behind me, with no time to react? And that tension builds. Lap after lap. Corner after corner. Now George Russell adds another layer. And this is where the situation becomes undeniable. He made it clear this is bigger than competition, bigger than team advantage. This is about responsibility. Because even teams benefiting from the system started to admit it shouldn't exist like this. And when the people winning are asking for change, that's when you know something is fundamentally wrong. But here's the detail that almost no one outside the paddock understood. This wasn't just about speed. It was about timing. The moment the system activates is completely unpredictable. It depends on battery state, energy recovery, race conditions, which means one car can behave normally, and then suddenly become dramatically slower in the worst possible place. On a straight, where cars are closest, where speeds are highest, where reaction time disappears. And yet, even after China, even after multiple drivers repeated the same warning, the FIA still didn't make a decisive change. Small adjustments were discussed, minor tweaks considered, but nothing that addressed the core issue. And this is where pressure turns into inevitability. Because every race without a fix increases the probability, not of if, but when. And now we arrive at Suzuka. Not the race itself, but the days before it. Because what happened there is the part that makes everything else impossible to ignore. Drivers stopped suggesting. They started insisting. And one voice stands out more than all the others, because it becomes the most disturbing detail in this entire story. And when you hear what he said, just hours before the crash, you realize this was never going to end any other way. Suzuka didn't start with the crash. It started with something much more dangerous. Certainty. By the time Formula One arrived in Japan, the warnings were no longer predictions. They were expectations. Drivers weren't asking if something could happen. They were asking when it would happen. And that changes the entire atmosphere. Because when a paddock full of elite drivers all feel the same risk, at the same time, you're no longer dealing with theory. You're standing on the edge of reality. In the days leading up to the race, the tone became sharper, more direct, less diplomatic. Carlos Sainz didn't soften it anymore. He made it clear this wasn't just a qualifying issue. This was a race problem. A full race, with fuel loads, tire wear, battery variation, making everything even more unpredictable. And then he added something that made it worse. Much worse. He pointed to tracks like Miami. Street circuits. Walls close. No escape. No margin. And suddenly, Suzuka didn't feel like the real danger anymore. It felt like the warning before something bigger. But then, something else happened. A detail that most fans completely missed. A rookie driver said something no rookie is supposed to say. He called the car dangerous. Not difficult. Not tricky. Dangerous. And when a young driver, with everything to prove, uses that word, it tells you the situation has gone too far. Because rookies don't speak like that unless they feel it. And then comes the most important moment of all. The one that changes how you see everything. Saturday. Less than 24 hours before the race. Oliver Bearman is asked about the issue. Calm. Composed. No drama. And he describes it perfectly. He talks about large speed differences. He talks about complicated situations during the race. He talks about the need for the FIA to act. Not eventually. Now. And here's why this moment matters more than anything else. Because what he describes is not general. It's specific. It's precise. It's exactly what is about to happen to him. That's the part that stays with you. This wasn't hindsight. This wasn't analysis after the fact. This was a driver explaining the mechanism of his own crash before it even happened. And no one stopped it. Not the FIA. Not the system. No one. So when Sunday arrives, everything is already in motion. The conditions are there. The risk is there. The warnings are there. All that's missing is the moment. And when it finally comes, it doesn't feel like an accident. It feels like the inevitable outcome of something that was allowed to continue for too long. And what happens in that moment is even more brutal than anyone expected. Lap 22. This is where everything breaks. Not gradually. Not with warning. Instantly. Bearman is flat out. Over 300 kilometers per hour. Everything feels normal. The car is stable. The line is clean. The gap ahead looks exactly as expected. And that's the illusion. Because in Formula One, everything is built on expectation. You trust what you see. You trust what you calculate. And in that moment, both are about to betray him. Up ahead, another car enters a critical state. Battery depleted. The system reacts automatically. No driver input. No warning signal. Just a sudden switch. From power to recovery. And when that happens, the car doesn't just slow down. It collapses in speed. 40, maybe more, kilometers per hour gone almost instantly. Now imagine this. You're approaching at full speed. You've already committed. Your braking point is locked. Your trajectory is set. And suddenly, the car ahead is no longer where it should be in time. It's slower. Much slower. And you're closing in faster than your brain can process. This is the moment everything compresses. Distance disappears. Options disappear. Time disappears. Bearman realizes it. Too late. He moves to avoid the car ahead. Instinct. Pure instinct. But then, the final piece falls into place. The car in front shifts slightly. Not aggressively. Not intentionally. Just enough. A small lateral movement. Less than a meter. But at that speed, that's everything. Because that small movement closes the only escape route. And now there is no decision left. Only consequence. Bearman is forced offline. Onto the edge. Where grip disappears. Where control no longer exists. The car becomes a projectile. No steering input can save it. No braking can stop it. Just momentum. Straight toward the wall. And then, impact. Violent. Sudden. 50G. A force so extreme that in most racing categories, it would end much worse. The car absorbs it. The structure holds. The safety systems do their job. But don't confuse survival with safety. Because what just happened was not a failure of the driver. Not even a failure of the car. It was a failure of predictability. And here's the part that changes everything. Every single element of that crash was already described before it happened. The sudden loss of speed. The massive closing rate. The lack of reaction time. The unpredictable movement. All of it. This wasn't chaos. This was a sequence. A chain reaction. Built into the system. And once it started, there was no stopping it. Now think about what that means. If a crash can be predicted, step by step, before it happens, then it's not just an accident anymore. It's a design flaw. And when that realization hits the paddock, that's when everything changes. Because the conversation is no longer about performance. It's about responsibility. And what happens next is where the pressure truly explodes.